Hello, everybody. We're about to start. So if you're here, please turn on your camera. And by the way, I have noticed like some students are forgetting about the attendance sheet that you need to sign up to. So if you haven't done that, please log into the Google Drive thing and fill the sheet. Um, so let's see how many you have here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let me share the screen. Okay. Okay. All right. So today, as a matter, we're going to back to talk about experiments. We supposed to talk about statistics from Friday, and so we're going to continue talking about experiments today, right? And I want to start by retraining about how we conduct hypotheses and how we could analyze hypotheses, because I noticed even in activity number 4 that some people are still confused by what the independent variable and what the dependent variable is. But it's really important to understand how you're going to work like an experiment out, or like how many conditions you should set up for testing or to test a particular hypothesis. So let's see here. So I'll start and here. So here in hypothesis 1, so hypothesis 1 reads, participants who view a news story with a negative ending will be able to recall more story items than those who view story with a positive ending or a neutral ending. My questions to you is, how many, if we are going to set up an experiment, how many conditions we're going to have for hypothesis 1? How many conditions? And you can answer in the chat if you prefer. Read hypothesis 1. Tell me how many conditions it's trying to compare. Anyone? Okay, so Kali says 2 either positive or negative ending. Did you read the hypothesis again? How many conditions we're going to have out of hypothesis 1? By the way, could you turn your cameras on? Because I'm not sure if people are here or not. Right. Thank you, Jennifer. Right. Yeah. So it's yeah. So we have positive ending, negative ending, or neutral. Okay. It's actually 3. Okay. So let's try another one. So and read this. This should be easier. Students who have a friendly instructor in class will express greater levels of engagement than students who have a socially distant instructor in another class setting. So how many conditions we have in here in hypothesis 2? How many conditions? The hypothesis 2. How many groups are we going to compare? Right. So yeah, there are 2. So what are the 2 groups in hypothesis 2? Okay. Someone. So Jennifer, you say 2. So what are going to be the 2 groups? That hypothesis 2.
I think friendly instructor and socially distant instructor.
Right. So group 1 with a friendly instructor, group 2 with a social distant instructor, right? Okay. Hypothesis 3. So students in the small classes will have a higher communication apprehension from the instructor, and this effect will be more pronounced if the instructor was female. So let's look at this one more carefully. Okay, so let's see here. So let's analyze hypothesis. So I said, yeah, hypothesis 1 was easy in a sense that we have like news story ending with the independent variable, and it had 3 conditions, like a positive, negative, or neutral. And the outcome was recall items. Hypothesis 3 is saying class size affects student apprehension, but it's going to be better of like students would experience even better apprehension if the instructor was female, right? So if we want to set up, think about, okay, so we want to set up like an experiment to test this hypothesis, all right? So factor 1, or the first independent variable, is class size, large or small. Factor 2, instructor gender, so we're comparing male to female. What are the number of categories in each factor? So in factor 1, how many categories we have? You just point with your hands. How many categories? Yeah, 2. And how many categories we have in factor 2? Yeah, 2. So male, this is female instructor. So the research design statement would be like a 2x2 design, okay? Hence, how many conditions we are going to end up with in total for this experiment? We have 2x2 design. So how many conditions? Everybody, how many conditions? Yeah, 4. Okay. Okay, so Kylie, can you list them? To say we have 4. So we're going to have 4 conditions. What are they?
Would it be the class size of being either large or small, and then the instructor gender of either being female or male?
Right. And then that would mean what? So condition 1 would be what? Would have what? So large or small, male, female. So condition 1 would have.
I'm not sure.
If it's going to be a large class, then the instructor would be what? Or like you could pick anyone in whatever order. So again, we're having.
Is it the first condition would be a large class with the male, a large class with the female, a small class with the male, and then a small class with the female?
Right. Yeah. Easy peasy. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah. When you say, when you say it's a 2 by 2, notice it's a multiply. It's not a combination. It's not plus. 2 by 2. So that means the two factors will interact with one another. So it would be small class male, small class female, large class male, large class female, right? In whatever order you want to say, it doesn't matter, right? And we want to see how it affects communication apprehension, okay? And so it is important to notice how many categories are within each factor, because that would determine how many conditions you're going to end up with in the experiments. So imagine if we're having class size, if we say it's large, medium, or small, that means we'd have 3 by 2, which then would lead us to have 6 conditions, right? So, and here what we're saying, so this is, we're saying, the hypothesis is saying that class size affects communication apprehension, all right? So the larger the class is, the less communication apprehension students would have. So the larger the class size, the less the communication apprehension. By the way, is this a negative or a positive association? Positive or negative? The class size goes up, communication apprehension goes down.
Negative.
Right, yeah. So it's a negative association here, right? Yeah. Thank you also, Natalie, right? So yeah. So that's first path of effects. So from the main independent variable to the dependent variable or the outcome. And then we're also saying the instructor gender would affect student comprehension. That's number. And then the third path, which you are saying, the class size as affected by the instructor gender would affect student comprehension, right? And so, and we have 4 possible combinations, as we said in path 3. We call this, by the way, the interaction effect. The interaction effect means it's not only one variable that is affecting the outcome, it's more than like 2 variables, like 2 variables or more interacting together, hence interaction. Because the hypothesis we have is saying, if you have a small class and a female instructor, like student communication apprehension would be improved. So in other words, like a small classes are better than large classes in general, but a small class with a female instructor is better than a small class with a male instructor for the sake of communication apprehension, right? We call that interaction effect, and that's like the gender basically. So something moderate the effect of the class size on communication apprehension, right? So when you add the factor of gender to the main effect from class size to communication apprehension, it actually boosts it up if it's female, or lower it down a bit if it was a female instructor. And by the way, this is just a made-up hypothesis, right? I'm not familiar, honestly, with the research, if that is true or not, but this is just an example to illustrate what we mean by interaction effect, right? So you get this point, right? So interaction effect, that's what it means. Sometimes it's also called a moderating effect. So the second factor would be called the moderator. That is to say, gender by itself does not affect the outcome. So the gender of the instructor does not affect the outcome by itself. But when it's combined with the main independent variable or factor, it would produce even a greater effect on the outcome, right? So when you read in a paper like gender was a moderator or income was a moderator, that's what it means. That this variable, when it was compounded with the first independent variable or predictor, changed the outcome, all right? But not by itself if it was a moderator. Question to you. So if we're testing this hypothesis, is it better to observe those effects in the real world, or should we create new experimentation group, right? So is it better to observe those effects about class size and structure gender in the real world, or should we create like those 4 experimentation groups? Which one do you think is better? This is if you ask again, so imagine if we want to test this hypothesis, if small classes with female instructors are better, should we observe small classes with female instructors in the real world, or should we create experiments or like experimental classes in which we assign female versus male instructor and large class sizes versus small class sizes? What would be the pros and cons of each? Okay. So Jennifer, you're saying real world. Why is that?
Because if you do the test on like real world classes, then you'll get like real, I guess like real students feedback. It depending on the like I guess the kind of student you want to get. Like, and if it's in a like an experiment, like an environment that you create, it might be like biased because everyone's gonna be like, talking about it and like paying special attention. I don't know. And it might be like different kind of learners.
Yeah, but if the experiments were actual classes, so we started, so let's say next semester, we're going to have those 4 groups, and then we're going to assign real students to each condition with grades and everything. So it's not a mock-up, it's a real class.
Well, then everyone's gonna give like good grades.
Because, okay, you're actually right. Okay, this is a good point. You're talking about the observer effect, right? Because the students know
If their grade is on it, then it's like,
yeah.
we'll
Imagine we hit that part. They don't know the purpose of the experiment. They don't know the purpose. They don't know which condition they're in. We randomly assign them to one of each. Let me take a step back. Remember the example I gave last week when we talked about the effects of music on student on student ability to study, right? So if you listen to jazz versus, let's say, rock, would that have an effect of how, like, your level of concentration when you study? Remember that example? Like the example we gave about watching drama versus comedy. What would be the drawback? Let me ask it in another way. What would be the drawback of observing this effect in the real world? If we just observe small classes with female instructors and compare them with large classes with male instructors in the real world, what would be a limitation of that in terms of our results? Any ideas? Let me ask it also another way. Why do we do experiments? What did we say the function of experiment? Why? What's the reason of doing experiments? We want to prove what? Something start with the C. Experiments are done to prove. Any idea? Right. Yeah, yeah. You're right, Miranda. You don't have control. Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So in experiments, you have control. Okay. So right. So Kylie's saying, yeah, you need to define what you mean by Slaughter's ball. Yeah, but even if we draw that, we can still observe it in the real world. But look, you don't have control. So let me ask you again. Did you sign up for this class yourself? Or someone assigned you to this section? Based on availability, right? But all of you, I would assume, signed up willfully for this section, correct? Yes? Yeah, right. Okay. And you picked this section with the time, with the instructor, and seeing how many people were in the class, right? Okay. So if you're observing effects in the real world, okay, would people who prefer small classes sign up for small classes? Assuming it's a college thing, yeah. And people who prefer large classes would sign up for what? For large classes, correct? So that means what? We didn't have control of who belongs to which group, right? So in other words, if you're looking into the effects on communication apprehension, the students pick the class size they prefer, and they pick the instructor that they prefer. That means you don't have control whatsoever on the independent variables. The students were not randomly assigned. Right? Because if you sign up for a class setting you like, obviously that's going to affect how much you pay attention. So you could imagine, for instance, that students who like to pay more attention would sign up for small classes. Students who don't like to be bothered will sign up for large classes. And so when you're measuring apprehension, it's going to be affected by that, by student preference. But it then has nothing to do with the class size. So you see here, actually, the cause, the effect became the cause, and the cause became the effect. The students with more apprehension signed up for small classes instead, yeah. So that's why we need experiments. And we say experiments are meant to prove causality. That's why we do experiment in the first place. Without control, without random assignments, you can never prove causality. Like you could prove correlations, you could prove associations, but which one caused what, which one preceded what exactly, that's something that you cannot control unless you do experiments. So that's the point. So now we're going to move on to talk about like challenges when you try to design an experiment, or like if anyone is trying to do some experiments. So challenge one is to find a theoretical framework, and this is very important, by the way, for the thing that I was just talking about, which is causality. So any link between two independent variables, dependent and independent variable or moderating variable, must make sense within a theoretical framework, right? And so when you're reporting experimental finding, you must also explicitly state what theory is being tested, or what exactly is the link that you're trying to verify with your experiments. Like, like how the hypothesis being empirically linked to the theory. And empirically, we spend a lot, like first 2 weeks of semester talking about empirical. So empirical means observable, verifiable, detectable, testable, etc. And so let me elaborate with an example, right? Say, for instance, we are using media multitasking. We said using media multitasking or experiencing media multitasking. You know what media multitasking is, right? Multitasking? That's not. You know what multitasking is. I don't need to explain it. With increased eating of unhealthy snacks as opposed to healthy snacks. Okay. What's the theory behind that? Right. So it could be when people are not paying attention, or when people under a lot of like mental pressure, do they make more informed decisions or less informed decisions? What do you think? When you are thinking about a lot of things at the same time, do you make more informed decisions or less informed decisions? How many, just raise your hand, how many think you make more informed decision where you're under stress? Okay, how many think you make less informed decision when you're thinking about a lot of things at the same time? Okay, yes, yes, right. So also this is the same reasoning, right? Yeah, thank you. I've been increased less. Right. So the same reasoning is with media multitasking. If a lot of things are going on, you're watching, you're streaming something on your screen, you're doing something on social media on your laptop, or like let's say you have also like an assignment on your laptop, and also you're doing like I don't know, like a snapshot on your cell phone. So 3 things going on at the same time. And so you just want anything to escape, like to ease that mental pressure. So you're looking for unhealthy snacks. You won't think about what you eat. Oh, let me eat a healthy meal. No, you'll just get like whatever you have, like chips or spicy popcorn or whatever you have, right? So here, there is something called like at least a logical cohesive link, which we can test to see if it's true or not. But if you are just trying to link 2 things that has no logically clear connection, so even when they are statistically associated, but there's no theoretical explanation for that, we call that data dredging or p-hacking, which is like you do an experiment and like you throw out different variables and you see whichever 2 would correlate, and you would call that a finding. All right. So here, for instance, like in the cartoon, like you see here, like a top left corner, like unicyclists are more likely to win the lottery. Okay. Assuming this correlation is true, how does being a unicyclist explain better chances of winning the lottery, right? So there's no logical connection between the 2. So even if they are statistically correlated, unless you can provide a logical explanation, we would just say, yeah, that this is just like a spurious correlation. Like you don't have no basis for claiming that it's really awesome. Or if you say, for instance, like in the other cartoon, like people who are more likely to drink soy lattes on Tuesday rather than green tea are less likely to have a stroke. So soy lattes on Tuesday are less likely to cause, like, you would produce no stroke. Unless you can really show the link between soy lattes and strokes, specifically on Tuesdays, we could just say, yeah, this is just a random correlation. Like if you take, there are millions, as we said before, there are millions of variables in the world, and 2 of them could correlate with no reason, like with no theoretical reason. And unless you could demonstrate how X leads to Y, then you actually have no actual theoretical finding. Okay? And so that's about the theoretical foundation. But also there are challenges related to the experimentation itself. And that is to say, when you're trying to create materials for the manipulation stimuli, as we say. And so the first one is like you are able to create a manipulation stimuli that represent the independent variable more than anything else, right? And that is to say, like you need to explain how the materials you use for each condition represent the categories of the variable you're trying to manipulate. And let me give an example to like illustrate this point, right? So say, for instance, that you have a hypothesis that said exposure to LGBT characters on TV or in TV drama affect participants' views in gay equality. So the idea is you see LGBT characters in TV drama, you become more receptive to gay equality views. And so the experiment, so the treatment condition, you said like inclusion of visibly gay characters, and the control condition is no visibly gay character, right? Simple. The question is, how do you ensure that the character is indeed visibly gay? And that's like, this is only one example. So this is the tricky part. So are you going to, is it like a matter of the way they dress or the way they talk? But how do you know that people or audiences would perceive that as being visibly gay, quote unquote? Or like, do you make something more explicit, like they mention, like a woman, let's say, oh, I went with my wife to blah blah blah, so you would understand she's uh, she's she's a lesbian, or like do you see someone like in a gay bar, or do you show like two persons in a relationship, right? So when we're trying to test those things, yeah, you will counter the issue that what could be visibly gay, quote unquote, to me could be different than what's visibly gay to others, right? And so as an experimenter, then your role that is to make sure that that treatment is understood by as much participant as possible. Like that you indeed produced that treatment, like, yeah, like people would truly identify the LGBT character in that TV drama, right? But it's become very clear for audiences, okay? So that's the problem of creating stimuli, all right? Or when you say, for instance, that like if we're comparing like films like with fighting scenes versus film without fighting, yeah, like you have to show like a clear fighting versus non-clear fighting. Okay. What leads us to talk about this point is like how you manipulate things if you're conducting experiment. And this is unique, by the way, for communication research more than any other field. So I'm going to invite you here to read. Let me pick a color. So you can please read list A first. So this is a list of attributes, all right, of stimuli. And then read list B. And try to figure out what's the difference between the two. What's different between the items in list A and the items in list B? So please read them carefully and let me know what you think. Take a minute to do that. All right, any ideas? What do you notice about list A that is different than list B? Anyone? So what's unique about list A?
I'm not sure, but I'll take a stab at it.
Yeah,
See,
yeah.
stab, video games, violence. Okay. So I think that list A describes like is only categorizing or coding like visuals, like
Mhm,
what it looks like.
mhm.
And list B is like categorizing like the experience or
Yeah.
like something like that.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right. So list A describe tangible attributes. Sorry, something that you could see or hear. And list B is talking about your perception or interpretation or your experience, right? So if you look at list A, uh, black and white pictures, that's something visible, clearly visible, like a colored picture versus black and white, right? Long commercials versus short commercial, right? Is that something, yeah, we can easily manipulate. So 50 seconds, 15 seconds versus 5 minutes, right? Red color packaging, okay, can you visibly just change that? Okay. Is it based on it's when we say a red color packaging, is that based on the experience or just the appearance? So color is about the appearance, right? High definition video is the same thing, right? Like a video that is 1080 pixels is visually different than a video that's 360 pixels. And if you're recruiting African American actors, like visibly different than a Caucasian actor or Asian American actor, etc. But if you look at list B, like violent video game or threatening message, right? Is violence in terms of the way I perceive it, is it the same way as my Reed perceive it or Sydney perceive it or Ariana perceives it? So no, right? So this is more about the experience. It's more about perception. So violent video games, threatening messages, sex appeal ad. One ad you think used sex appeal, another person say, well, not really. Thin ideal. What is thin ideal? Uplifting music. What is uplifting? What is uplifting to you could be depressing to me or vice versa. So yeah, it's more, I'm not saying they are meaningless, but there's like more about the perception rather than something we could directly or tangibly manipulate. And that's exactly what we're talking about. So before we get this example, let me get you here. Yeah, so in experimental design, the key is sometimes you hypothesize about psychological reactions that affect the dependent variable, right? So when someone says violent video games affect aggressive thoughts, actually you cannot test that unless you show the link between the actual game, if it's perceived as violent, and then how it affects aggressive thoughts, right? So that's the difference between audio visual attributes. Right? So audio visual attributes are the first step. So you took one game and you made it more violent. Someone else, the producers, made it violent, all right? And you are thinking that those elements would create the perceived attribute you have, which is like a violent video game. So like it's about like the graphics, the soundtrack, like showing source or like the plot itself, the characters, blah blah blah. Create the intended perceived or experienced attribute, which then affect the dependent variable. So if you think it affects aggressive thought, excitement, blah blah blah, you test it here. But before that, you need to show that the audio visual attributes created the experience or the intended perceived attribute, right? And so that's this is unique, by the way, to communication research, that you are actually testing the effect of experienced attributes on the outcomes. But before that, you have to show that the message, the audio-visual attributes clearly created that different experience between the conditions, right? And so here, let's look at an example. And this is this one is from an actual research. This has been tried. It's a paper by Perry and al. in 1997. So it said, more humorous commercials results in greater product appeal, improved recall, and greater purchase attention than less humorous commercials. So let's just focus on one. Let's say greater product appeal, okay? So more humorous is better than less humorous. Condition A, more humorous, and we're testing it against condition B. The challenge is, how did the experimenters create each condition? And so what the experimenters say, well, condition A, we showed humorous and edited commercials, so full humorous commercials. Condition B, they said, we showed the same commercials with a punchline removed. All right. So they took out the punchline, or maybe the last 5 seconds of the commercials, but they were the same commercials. And the removal of the punchline reduced the level of humor. See? So you get the first part that is humorous, but you didn't get the punchline. So those people in that condition felt less amused, or felt it's less funny, because they didn't get the full joke, right? They got half a joke. And so the condition B was perceived as less humorous than condition A, right? And so to change it, to explain it even further, what the experimenter did, they changed some of the audio-visual attributes. So they cut out the punchline. So they changed something in the video of the commercial, which led to a difference in the perception. So when it was fully humorous, it became less humorous, which would then affect the dependent variable, as the experimenters argue, which is to say, like a product appeal. Okay. So the idea here is, before you move on to test this relationship of the hypothesis, you actually have to establish the link between the message attributes and the psychological reactions, right? So before we even test the hypothesis, we're going to make sure that the manipulation materials in the experiments lead to the desired 2 conditions or 3 conditions we actually like to compare. And this question is what we would call the manipulation check in an experiment, right? And so, yeah, so a manipulation check is, you ask if there was a difference indeed between how each condition was perceived. So in this experiment, and this is going to be my last slide today, by the way, the manipulation check was that the researcher asked the participant to rate the condition they saw. And so the question was, did you perceive this commercial to be amusing, depressing, funny, entertaining, blah, 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 on a scale of 0 to 10, so 11 point. So the point is, condition B should score less than condition A in being funny, right? And if condition B was perceived as less funny than condition A, that means the manipulation worked. So then the experimenters could proceed to test the hypothesis. So that's what we would call manipulation check, and it's something that you need to look for when you're reading experimental research paper, to see if indeed the researcher showed how each condition was different than the other condition. So that's it for today. Do you have any questions? Okay, and if you have other questions, by the way, about the assignments of the group project,